Hello and welcome. Can any American president get it right, according to the public? It's a question Barack Obama faces ahead of midterm elections in a week, in what will be something of a report card on how he's doing. The challenge of such leadership is something few get to experience, but one man who really knows how hard it is to be the president of the USA during a time of political and economic difficulty is Jimmy Carter. He ran under the slogan, "A leader for a change," winning the support of a population largely rejecting the disgrace of President Richard Nixon's Watergate scandal. Well, the Carter years saw some progress on some fronts, notably the Camp David Accords, bringing peace between Israel and Egypt, and the Panama Canal Treaty, unpopular at home for eventually ending U.S. control of the strategic waterway. The public also remembers the Iranian hostage crisis of 1979 and the disastrous rescue attempt of the 52 captive Americans, which many say caused his defeat at the next election. Well, President Carter's modern-day legacy has been shaped as a peacemaker and human rights campaigner through his respected non-profit organization, the Carter Center. Well, he's talked about his experience candidly in his book, The White House Diary, which includes insights from his personal log. As we start our discussion, you can join in with your questions and comments, send an SMS or an email, and we'll try to include them in the show. President Carter joins us today from Seattle. Sir, it's good to speak with you again.
It's good to be with you and all the people all over the world, I guess. Thanks a lot.
Good to have you. So now, what made you discuss all this material candidly from your personal notes at this time? Why 3 decades on do you feel it's important for people to know?
Well, a couple of years ago, I started reading through my diary notes, and I found that I had 5,000 pages of them. And I wanted to select from them the things that were most pertinent to today's events and challenges that President Obama and other leaders have to face, and also to recapitulate some of the most important issues that I faced successfully, and some apparently without complete success back in those days. I wanted to let the readers know the intricate details of how a presidency is shaped. What are the pressures on a president? What are the successes, and how do he react to those and to those things that he tries and doesn't be completely successful? And also to give some insight into my own family affairs. Just the inside look, which is unprecedented, I think, in history, into what a president does, what he thinks, and how he reacts to public events.
Right. Well, sir, just over a year ago, we discussed with you your last book on the Middle East peace prospects, and it came with the idea of, quote, a plan that will work, to take some of the title there. Now, it doesn't seem like anyone's listening. In a nutshell, how do you regard the current situation with the Middle East?
Well, I just got back from a visit with Palestinians and with Israelis, with Jordanians and Syrians, and with Egyptians just a few days ago. And I found over there an almost complete absence of confidence that the so-called direct talks are going to have any result, and also a great deal of skepticism about whether or not, if the direct talks are initiated again, that they will do anything more than give Israel more time to continue with their settlement policy and that sort of thing in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. So not any hope that I have discovered, but a determination on the part of many just to wade through this crisis and hope that something will happen with U.S. policy, whereby a plan that's reasonable, that's compatible, I would say, with the Arab Peace Initiative would be proposed, and a lot of pressure put on Israel to comply.
Well, of course, making unpopular choices when it comes to Middle East peace is something that seems to happen all round, or needs to be taken all round. And you write that about that in your book. And I wonder, what did the Egyptian President Anwar Sadat have to go through when it came to reaching a commitment for the Camp David Accords in 1978-79, when you were there with him?
Well, Sadat spent most of his time trying to make sure that the Palestinians would have fair treatment. And in the Camp David Accords, a text which Menachem Begin signed and which was ratified by 85% of the Knesset, the Israelis agreed to withdraw their military and political forces from the West Bank, and also from Gaza at that time. They also agreed to let the Palestinians have full control over their future. And they agreed, Menachem Begin agreed, not to have any more settlements built in the occupied territories until after the peace process was over. We also later had a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, and of course there are 2 different responses to those commitments. One, the peace treaty with Israel and Egypt, not a word of which has been violated in the last 31 years, but promises made concerning the Palestinians that were made to me and to Sadat and to the world have not been fulfilled.
Well, sir, when Sadat and Begin were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1978, you wrote in your personal diary that Sadat deserved it, but Menachem Begin did not. And I wonder if you could candidly say whether you felt that sentiment ever express itself in the way you had to deal with the Israeli leader.
Well, the reason I put that in my diary at the time was that I could see then that shortly after we left Camp David, that it was not likely that Israel would carry out its commitments in dealing with the Palestinians. And of course, Sadat, so far as I know, carried all his commitments to the fullest until he was assassinated, unfortunately, because he was a peacemaker. So that's a basic difference. They were both courageous men, they were both strong men, and as you know from studying history, at least if you're not old enough to remember, the two men could speak with authority for their own particular faction of the government that ruled at that time in Egypt and in Israel.
Of course, sir, just to touch on some of the other things that happened during your administration, you decided it was time to give the Panama Canal back, and I wonder, it was a decision that was unpopular at home. It gave you a lot of international credibility, of course. What made you feel at that time it was the right thing to do?
Well, it was a decision that had been made even earlier, as far back as President Eisenhower, and with President Johnson, and with President Nixon before me. They all agreed to do so. But they saw that the decision would be very unpopular with the American public. So they postponed the decision until I came into office, and I saw that it was a very important thing for us to do, because we had lost the friendship and support, even diplomatic relations, with a lot of the Latin American countries that saw this was a very unfair arrangement. And I studied the issue very thoroughly and negotiated day by day with Omar Torrijos, who was the leader of Panama at the time. We came up with a fair agreement, and then my big challenge, the biggest challenge I ever faced in my life, politically speaking, was to get 2/3 of the members of the Senate to vote for it. It was the most difficult and courageous decision that Congress has ever made in history. 20 of the members of the Senate who voted for the treaties, who were up for re-election that year, there were 20 of them, only 7 of them out of 20 came back to the Senate the following year. That shows you how unpopular it was. And of course, 2 years later, there was a lot of attrition too. I was one of those who maybe suffered from that decision.
So we had an email, if I could put this to you, sir, from Ireland, Jonathan Victory writing in saying, in 1979, Carter said the US would never use more foreign oil than they did in 1977. And now they use 5 million more barrels than they did in 1977. What went wrong? And I know the energy crisis of the 1970s was involved some more tough choices there. I wonder, when you look at the lessons learned from that time, what was actually learned?
Well, I imposed a comprehensive energy policy on our country, and with the full approval of Republicans and Democrats, and with overwhelming approval of the American people. When I was inaugurated, we were importing 8 million barrels a day. I cut that down in 5 years to 4 million barrels a day. I cut it in 50%. And now it's almost tripled since I left office. So I couldn't control what subsequent presidents did. I couldn't control the enormous influence of the oil companies and the automobile companies and so forth. And I couldn't control, of course, what the Congress did. So I've been very disappointed to see that the policy that we evolved during those 4 years has been basically abandoned.
Now, at the time of your presidency, sir, you didn't really have the best of relationships with the media. I know you write that you felt you were unfairly targeted. Why was that?
Well, I think I came in at a time when the media were very skeptical or cynical about incumbent presidents. I followed it was right in the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, when the lies that were told by President Nixon, and I would say even earlier falsehoods that had been told under President Johnson and others about Vietnam, had become exposed. And so there was a great deal of belief that there was something wrong with any presidency if the news reporters were just avid enough and competent enough to root out the hidden secrets. And so I didn't, and I also had a very courageous element in the Congress that stuck with me. And we had some very controversial things to put forward. As I've already mentioned, they were not very popular. In fact, bringing Sadat into my circle of negotiators was not popular at all. He was looked upon, when I became president, as the #1 enemy of our ally, Israel. And so I made a lot of decisions that were not very popular. Another one that was maybe had long-ranging historical significance was my decision finally, after 35 years, to have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. And that has basically changed the global scene as far as international affairs are concerned.
Well, sir, a question from Ghana by email, if I could. It came from Ken Carr, who says, what would Carter have done differently if he were to relive the Iran hostage crisis as president? I know some say that was the tipping point for your not being re-elected. What do you think, sir?
That's a decision I get quite often. I would have sent one more helicopter on the rescue mission. If I had, then we could have brought out all the rescue team and all the hostages that were being held. And I don't think there's any doubt that my own political future would have been shaped differently. I would have had 4 more years to serve as president. So that's one thing that could have been done. We sent 8 helicopters, thinking that was enough spares. One of them turned back inexplicably to the aircraft carrier. Another one was put down in a sandstorm, and then a third one, with no really apparent reason, ran into one of the C-130s and was damaged. So we were down below what we needed to have to extract our people who were in Iran. If I had to do one more thing in my whole presidency, I would have sent one more helicopter.
Well, President Carter, I'm going to ask you to stand by. We take a short break now. When we return, what advice does President Jimmy Carter have for another Democratic president facing a tough midterm election? Don't go away. Welcome back. 4 years in the White House can feel like a very long time with the weight of the world on one's shoulders. Many say that Barack Obama is going through a similar experience to another American president who left the Oval Office nearly 3 decades ago. President Jimmy Carter is my guest, discussing the challenges he faced during his time in office and how it might be relevant to today's incumbent. We're getting back to some questions here. So there are those who say that one of the issues that your administration faced in terms of criticism was that it took on too much. There was no real clear focus, trying to do too much in that short space of time. Do you feel now that you perhaps bit off more than you could chew?
No. In fact, we had the best success with the Congress of any president since the Second World War, except one, that was Lyndon Johnson, who had a little bit better batting average than I did. And we addressed the things forthrightly. I don't think the agenda was too great. We had a lot of successes in international affairs and also in domestic affairs. And also you have to remember that this time in my own administration, we had my midterm election when I was an incumbent president. And at the end of the election, we had 17 more senators than the Republicans did. And in the House, we had a remarkable 119 more Democrats than Republicans after the election was over. So you see, it was a completely different environment than what it is now.
Now, there are those who compare your presidency, sir, with that of Barack Obama nowadays, saying you're essentially going through the same kind of, well, he's going through the same kind of challenges that you did in the late 70s. I wonder, do you see that comparison?
No, it's not true at all. The difference is basically that I had remarkably good support from the Republican side of the aisle. I got almost as much support from the Republicans as I did the Democrats, because people don't remember it, but Senator Ted Kennedy was running against me for the next presidency. And so he took away a lot of the liberal Democrats from my support. So I had to turn to the moderate to conservative Democrats and Republicans, and they responded beautifully to help me through those times. And that's something that Obama has not had as a benefit. In fact, the Republicans have locked up in a completely irresponsible way and refused to give Barack Obama any support, except maybe 1 or 2 votes at the most, even when he puts forward ideas or proposals that the Republicans themselves have put forward earlier. So it's a completely irresponsible Republican Party that has afflicted Barack Obama with a very difficult 2 years.
Well, there's some who say that he's got the chance probably of only 1 term now, considering the challenges he faces. Having experience in that kind of situation, what do you judge as his chances for another election?
You know, in a strange way, it may be that after this election is over and the Republicans have a substantial advantage, that is, they might take over the House of Representatives, that's what the public opinion polls show, it may be that Barack Obama will be better off. You know, first of all, the Republicans will not any longer be affording complete irresponsibility. They'll have one of the houses of Congress in Washington, and the public will look to the Republicans to do some responsible things, which they haven't done so far. And secondly, I think Barack Obama can put forward his ideas, and most of them are very good, and when the Republicans in the House vote it down, he can go directly to the people of America and say, this is what I proposed, this is what the Republicans blocked, and now you can make a judgment about who's right. I think that might very well put us back in the time when I was still a submarine officer in 1948 when Harry Truman ran against formidable odds and was elected because he ran against a so-called do-nothing Republican Congress. So maybe that's, I'm trying to look at the best side of things. Maybe that's what Barack Obama will have as a benefit.
Now, how does an American president earn the right for a second term?
Well, first of all, you have to be lucky. You have to be cautious and not do too many things that might bring about some disappointments and some challenges. And you have to choose your issues so that not too many of them are unpopular. And unfortunately, that's what I failed to do. When I gave away the Panama Canal, when I normalized relations with Red China, when I brought in Arabs to negotiate with me on an equal basis with Israelis at Camp David. Those kind of things were extremely unpopular with the American people, but although they were the right things to do, and I think history has shown that. So a combination of those things, I would say one of the major issues is just good luck.
Of course, there are those who believe that there are presidents who've played dirty in the past. Richard Nixon was one of those who was accused of that, and even Ronald Reagan, according to some. And I wonder, you know, when people said you were too nice, that you played it too straight, and that perhaps distanced you from the American public because maybe they thought you were perhaps too pious. Does that resonate in any way, and does that danger also exist for Barack Obama?
You know, I don't think so. When I ran for office, there was no such thing as negative advertisements. When I ran against Gerald Ford in the White House, he always referred to me as my distinguished opponent. And that's the way I referred to him, and also 4 years later to Ronald Reagan. We didn't have much money then. We used the public money as our only campaign funds. And now hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing in to the American campaigns on both sides. And a lot of that money is used, as it was not used 30 years ago, as negative advertisements to try to destroy the character and reputation of your opponents. So that builds up animosity and distrust and scorn perhaps among the general public and also between candidates in different parties. So when the successful congressmen and senators do get to Washington, they still hate each other basically because they've been through those negative advertisements and challenges themselves. That's something we didn't know 30 years ago. We didn't have any negative advertising between presidents or even among the congressmen. And
now, of course, there's the Tea Party in the mix, and I wonder what you make of what's going on with that.
Well, I kind of like the Tea Party folks in a lot of ways. They've been misled because they've been financed, as you probably know, by some very rich oil company executives, the Koch brothers, so-called, and others as well. And now with the Supreme Court making his stupid ruling last January that corporations can give unlimited amount of money to political campaigns from secret donors, that has really aggravated an already bad situation. So the Tea Party folks are okay. They want to see change like a lot of my supporters did back in 1976. But they have been misled into espousing or protecting these special interest groups, and whereas they don't even realize what they're doing.
A quick thought, sir, as you go through the notes of your diary from those times and look at the decisions you had to make, the compromises perhaps you had to make, how much freedom do you feel you have now to really not have to compromise, to say it as it is?
Well, I don't ever intend to run for office again. I have Secret Service protection the rest of my life. So I feel completely free to go where I choose, to meet with whom I please, and to say what I really believe. And so that's given me a lot of freedom. Also, the Carter Center, where I work full time, has programs in 73 nations on earth, and the most important ones are in Africa, where the need is so great. And I've been particularly grateful to the OPEC Fund, for instance, for development, that has given us very large contributions, just recently $1 million, to help with medical care and prevention of diseases in the poorest neighborhoods in Africa and some other continents, in dealing with horrible diseases like guinea worm and river blindness. So I'm very grateful for a chance nowadays working with the Carter Center to do the things that I really find of great interest to me.
Yeah, I congratulate you on that donation, sir, because of course I know that will help with the work you do there. A thought, though, as we wrap things up, you mentioned about sending that extra helicopter in for the Iranian hostage situation, but if you could change something completely from your presidency, if there's one thing you could turn the clock back on and do totally differently, is there something you have in mind?
Well, that would be the main thing I would do. But I don't think that I would have had any smaller an agenda. I would still have started from the first week in office working for Middle East peace. I would still have worked with the Soviet Union to have control of nuclear weapons. I would still have normalized diplomatic relations with China. I would still have worked on giving the Panamanians what they really deserve, that is control of their own canal. And I would have worked to get a comprehensive energy policy, which I've just described to you. And we had a very good program for health care, comprehensive health care. That's one thing I would change. I think that I would have gone out of my way to be closer, maybe in partnership with Senator Kennedy, because he saw that the White House was something that he deserved. Since one of his brothers had served there, another one had been assassinated when he was seeking the presidency. And if I had just been able to work out a harmonious relationship within the Democratic Party, so Kennedy would decide not to run against me, but to support me, that's something in which I could have done a better job.
Now, I was just thinking, a lot of those issues you mentioned still exist today. They're still on the agenda: Afghanistan, nuclear issues, energy. And I wonder, when you look at the lack of progress 3 decades on, is it disheartening to see that things aren't where you would have hoped they might be?
Yes, I'm most disappointed about the Middle East peace process, where the Palestinians are still being persecuted, where Israel is still occupying the areas in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem and in Syria and to some degree in Lebanon. That's one thing that bothers me. I think had I been reelected, I could have pursued that process and come out better. And of course, Afghanistan is something that I suffered from, because the Soviets invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Day 1979, and I had to deal with that Soviet invasion and make sure they didn't take over Afghanistan and then move into adjacent countries as well. Iran was a different proposition then. They took my hostages, and I still try to have good diplomatic relations with the revolutionary government in Iran, both before that and after that was over. Now, of course, Iran is challenging in perhaps developing a nuclear weapon. So things have changed a lot. Now I would say that America's relationship with Latin American countries, because of Panama, is good. And as I said earlier in this program, I think the expansion of Chinese freedom within the country, and China's reaching out to be a world power, both economically and even politically, has been the result of another decision I made, that is to have diplomatic relations with China instead of with Taiwan.
Well, President Carter, of course, there are so many more questions I would love to ask you. God bless you. Thank you for taking the time out to share your thoughts with us.
I've always enjoyed being with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us too. Now remember, you can follow our program on Twitter, and we'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, what has changed since George W. Bush left the White House? Very little, according to writer and filmmaker Tariq Ali. The prominent historian gives his perspective on what the Obama administration has meant for those who sought, quote, hope and change. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.